I saw. The moment I crossed the entrance to the hall, my eyes met the scene I never imagined witnessing. Loud music filled the atmosphere, colorful lights danced on the walls, and people laughed, drank and talked as if that night was a common moment of celebration. But for me, that moment froze. Time dragged on, and every detail was recorded like a burning mark that I could never erase. She was there. With him. The bodies too close, the hands touching in an intimate way, and then, the kiss. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a stumble or a misunderstanding. It was intentional. The way she cupped his face, how he slid his hand down her back, how their lips met amidst snickers and knowing glances. I saw everything. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. A wave of heat took over my body, followed by a paralyzing cold. The conversations around me became a distant hum. I wanted to close my eyes, convince myself it was an illusion, but the throbbing pain in my chest told me it was real. She betrayed me. The blood pulsed in the ears. The images repeated in my head, like a broken movie that never came to an end. I could feel the bitter taste of humiliation, as if everyone there knew, as if every look was directed at me, mocking my confidence, my blind faith. But I didn't back down. I stood there, staring at them both, feeling the weight of every second. "Are you well?" a distant voice asked, but I didn't respond. Anger took shape. My mind raced through every moment of the last few months, the forced smiles, the apologies, the quick messages she deleted, the nights she came home late from work. Everything I wanted to ignore. The signs were there, clear as the sun, but I chose to trust. I chose to believe that none of this was true. "I love you, you know that." Her words echoed in my mind. How many times did she say that? How many times did she look me in the eye and swear that I was everything to her? Now those words meant nothing. They were empty as she seemed at that moment, lost in the arms of another man. I couldn't leave there without taking action. My legs moved on their own, crossing the crowded room as my heartbeat pounded in my ears. They didn't see me coming. They were so involved in each other that the world around them seemed to not exist. "So it's like this?" My voice cut through the air, louder than I intended. She jerked away from him as if she had been shocked, but it was too late. I had already seen everything. "This isn't what it seems." She stuttered, but her words only fueled my fury. "Isn't that what it looks like?" I laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. "Because from my point of view, it looks exactly like what it is." Silence spread around us. People started to notice. Murmurs grew. Looks turned, but I didn't care. There, at that party, in the midst of so many acquaintances and co-workers of hers, I exposed the truth. I want a divorce. The word cut the air like a knife. She turned pale. Her lover tried to intervene, but my gaze made him retreat. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His eyes were wide, and I could see the desperation growing. There was no turning back. But what happened next was what really changed everything. That party, that night, was just the beginning. What came next was something I could never have predicted. She tried to convince me, she tried to justify herself, but the words were empty. Her tears felt fake, and each attempt only made things worse. Her lover also paid dearly. I found out more than I should have about him that night. Hidden secrets, buried lies and a dirty game that involved much more than just betrayal. The truth came out in a way none of us expected. I watched everything fall apart around them. The masks fell, the rings were broken and the fake smiles disappeared. But what really shocked me wasn't just the betrayal. It was the reason. Why did she do this? Why him? And why that night? There was something behind that kiss. Something darker. And as the hours passed and the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, I realized that this wasn't just about love or desire. It was something more. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about her, about him and even about myself. But at that moment, all I knew was that that night would change my life forever. And what I discovered later was even worse. Welcome to the channel where the truth about cheating is exposed without filters. Here, we do not support and never justify any type of infidelity. All the stories presented are fictional, but they carry profound lessons about how betrayal can destroy lives, hearts and trust. Get ready to dive into an intense and shocking narrative, where secrets will be revealed and destinies will be transformed. Fasten your seatbelts. The story begins now. Lucas had always been a man of routine. Organized, dedicated to work and marriage, he was proud of the path he had taken so far. Married for 9 years to Emily, the woman he met during college, he liked to think they had built a stable, comfortable life together. It wasn't a fairy tale, but who needed fairy tales when you had stability and companionship? Emily was the opposite of Lucas in many ways. Spontaneous, charismatic and full of life, she lit up any place she went. She worked as a project manager in a large company, and her leadership skills made her a professional admired by everyone. Her career was on the rise, and she was proud of it. Despite all the responsibilities, he always found time to cultivate his relationship with Lucas, or at least that's what he believed. Their apartment was spacious and well decorated, reflecting both of their personalities. There was a balance between the impeccable order imposed by Lucas and Emily's creative touches, such as abstract paintings and colorful vases scattered throughout the corners. It was a cozy home, the kind of place where friends liked to gather and where they both liked to retreat to after long days of work. Lucas liked to cook, and Emily loved to praise the dishes he prepared, even when they didn't turn out exactly as expected. It was in these small interactions that Lucas felt like their marriage still had magic. The laughter shared over wrong recipes, the long conversations on the porch while drinking wine, and the nights they fell asleep on the couch watching old movies formed the foundation of the life they built together. But lately, Lucas had noticed subtle changes in Emily. She seemed more distracted, more worried. I spent more time on my cell phone, laughing at messages I didn't share with him. When he asked, she dismissed it, saying it was something related to work. There were nights when she would arrive late and explain that meetings were running overtime. Lucas wanted to believe it. I always wanted to believe her. Emily, on the other hand, also felt the changes in her marriage. Although she loved Lucas, she felt like their relationship had become predictable. The conversations were always about the same topics, the routines were repeated as if they were trapped in an endless cycle. She loved Lucas's affectionate way, but she missed the intensity they had at the beginning. As much as I tried to ignore it, this feeling of emptiness began to grow. Still, she knew Lucas was a good man. The kind of person you could trust. He supported her in everything, from her professional decisions to her personal projects. When Emily decided to take a specialization course to improve her skills, Lucas was the first to encourage her, even though he knew it would mean less time together. They had mutual friends and attended Emily's birthday parties, dinners and company events. Lucas liked to participate in these occasions, although he preferred quieter environments. He did it for Emily, because he knew how much it meant to her. Emily, on the other hand, shined in these situations. She had a natural ability to connect with people, especially her coworkers. It was at one of these parties, months ago, that Lucas met Emily's boss, Daniel. He was a confident man, always smiling and with an air of leadership that seemed to captivate everyone. Lucas found his demeanor friendly, although there was something about the way he looked at Emily that bothered him. But Lucas wasn't the jealous type. He trusted Emily and, even with that discomfort, he decided not to entertain unnecessary thoughts. As the weeks went by, Emily's schedule became even more unpredictable. Lucas tried to talk to her, but Emily always had answers ready. "You know how important this project is to me," she said, as she packed her bag to leave again. Lucas sighed, trying to be understanding. He knew how dedicated Emily was to her work, and he didn't want to be the controlling type of husband. But doubts began to grow. One night, Lucas prepared a special dinner, hoping to surprise her after a stressful week. He lit candles, played soft music and waited. Emily arrived late. Too late. And when he entered, he had a tired expression on his face, but with a sparkle in his eyes that Lucas couldn't explain. She apologized and said she was exhausted. Lucas smiled and tried to hide his disappointment. In the following days, he began to observe more. He noticed how Emily seemed more excited to go out to work, how she changed her clothes more often before deciding what to wear. He saw how she received messages during the night and left the room to respond. He tried to push away the bad thoughts, but they were there, more and more present. Emily, on the other hand, was also conflicted. She knew Lucas was dedicated, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being suffocated by a routine that no longer gave her excitement. She wanted to feel alive again, she wanted something that would take her away from that feeling of just existing. But she also knew that playing with feelings was dangerous. Still, Emily kept pushing these worries to the back of her mind. She wanted to believe it was just a phase. That, at some point, things would go back to the way they were before. Lucas also tried to convince himself of this. I tried to hold on to the good memories, the happy moments they shared. But the void between them seemed to grow. Until that night. The night of the party that changed everything. The night Lucas found himself faced with something he could never forget. Lucas woke up that morning feeling a strange weight on his chest. It was as if something was out of place, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The sun was shining through the bedroom window, and Emily had already left. Her side of the bed was empty, cold. He stayed there for a while, looking at the ceiling, trying to shake off the thoughts that insisted on taking over his mind. Over the past few days, the distance between them had become almost palpable. Emily was more absent than ever, and the few conversations they had seemed forced, superficial. Lucas tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong, but it was like trying to contain the water in a dam about to break. He knew he was losing control of the situation, and that scared him. She slowly got up and went to the kitchen, where she found a note left by Emily on the table. Important meeting tonight. Don't wait for me for dinner. The words seemed harmless, but Lucas felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. It was the third time that week that she had notified me about last-minute appointments. He tried to occupy himself during the day, but his mind kept going back to Emily. He remembered how she used to send him sweet messages in the middle of the workday, just to say she missed him. That didn't happen anymore. Now, when I picked up my cell phone, all I found were quick, vague answers. At work, Lucas could barely concentrate. He felt restless, as if something was about to happen. He came home early, deciding to prepare dinner for both of us. Maybe, with a good conversation, they could make things right. She prepared Emily's favorite dish and arranged the table with candles and flowers. He wanted to surprise her, show that he still cared, that he was willing to fight for them. But as the hours passed, the anxiety began to turn into frustration. He sent a message asking if she would be long, but got no response. When the clock struck 9 at night, Lucas was already restless. He called Emily, but the call went straight to voicemail. Tried again, with the same result. The silence on the other side was like a blow to the chest. Not knowing what to do, he got in the car and drove to the building where she worked. Maybe she was still there, stuck in some endless meeting. As he approached, he noticed that the parking lot was almost empty. There were only a few cars, and Emily's wasn't among them. Lucas felt his heart accelerate. Something was wrong. It was then that he remembered the company party. Emily had mentioned the event weeks ago, but he had completely forgotten about it. Without thinking twice, he drove to the location. The party took place in a luxurious function room, where the lights shined brightly and music echoed off the walls. Upon entering, Lucas felt the immediate impact of the environment. People laughed and danced, champagne glasses clinked, and everything seemed to revolve around a celebration. He walked around the room, eyes darting around every corner looking for Emily. And then he saw her. In the middle of the dance floor, her back was to him. The red dress stood out among the other people, and Lucas felt his heart race. For a moment, he thought about how beautiful she looked, but that feeling was quickly replaced by something darker when he realized who was standing next to her. Daniel. Emily's boss. Lucas stood still, unable to move. He watched as the two laughed together, their faces too close. Emily placed her hand on his shoulder, and Daniel leaned in, whispering something in her ear. She smiled. Lucas tried to convince himself that it was just a friendly conversation. After all, they worked together. But then it happened. The kiss. It was quick, but intense enough to make it clear it wasn't the first. Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The blood boiled in his veins, and his chest tightened as if he were being crushed. He wanted to run to them, confront them right there, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the shock, maybe it was the desire to understand before acting. He stood there, watching as the world around him seemed to fall apart. Emily turned away from Daniel and looked around, as if she felt she was being watched. When her eyes met Lucas's, she froze. The smile disappeared, and his face turned pale. Lucas took a step forward, but Emily was already heading towards him. "Lucas, I can explain." Her words sounded empty, as if she herself didn't believe what she was saying. "Explain what?" His voice came out louder than he intended. The people around started to notice, curious gazes turned towards them. "It's not what you think." Lucas laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound. "Then tell me what it is, because from my point of view, it looks exactly like it does." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel approached, as if he wanted to intervene, but Lucas's look made him stop. "There's nothing more to say." Lucas took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. "I want a divorce." The word hung in the air, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emily brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Daniel backed away, visibly uncomfortable. Lucas turned and left the room, feeling the weight of emotions suffocate him. Anger was mixed with pain, betrayal, humiliation. But most of all, there was a strange feeling that this wasn't the end. He knew there was something more. Something that had not yet been revealed. And the idea of what it could be made him uneasy. Lucas spent the night awake. The images of that kiss, the looks exchanged between Emily and Daniel, and her words trying to justify the unjustifiable swirled in his mind like an endless nightmare. He looked at the ceiling, his chest feeling tight, as if an invisible hand was suffocating him. "I couldn't decide whether I was more furious or devastated. What gnawed at him most was doubt. Why? Why did she do this?" The next morning, he decided he needed answers. It was not enough to know that he had been betrayed, he needed to understand. He decided to go to Emily's work, but before that, he went home to change his clothes. Upon entering the room, he noticed that some drawers were ajar. Something seemed out of place. Lucas felt a shiver run up his spine. When he opened one of the drawers, he found a black folder. He had never seen her before. With shaking hands, he opened it and began leafing through the papers. Contracts, printed emails, and bank transactions. Nothing made sense immediately, but then a name caught his attention. Daniel. He sat on the bed, feeling cold sweat running down the back of his neck. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly in the documents. There were records of money transfers and notes signed by Emily. On one of the papers, a handwritten note made Lucas' heart race, meeting to finalize transfers. Lucas' blood boiled. Emily and Daniel weren't just emotionally involved, there was something much deeper. He picked up the phone and called her. The cell phone rang several times until it went to voicemail. "Tried again, and nothing. Without thinking twice, Lucas got in the car and drove to her office. The parking lot was full, but Emily's car wasn't there. He went up to the floor where she worked and went straight to the receptionist. "Is Emily in the office?" The woman hesitated. "She didn't come today. He said he would be away for external meetings." Lucas felt his stomach sink. "And Daniel? He's not there either." Lucas left without answering. "My legs felt wobbly, but I couldn't stop now. I needed to find her." He called again, but still no answer. It was then that he realized something. He opened the folder again and found an address written on one of the papers. It was not a business address. When he arrived at the scene, he recognized Emily's car parked in the driveway. It was a remote, discreet house, with closed windows. Lucas got out of the car and went to the door. His heart was beating so loudly he could hear it. He knocked hard on the door. Nothing. Tried again. Until he heard footsteps. The door slowly opened, and there stood Emily. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Luke." Her voice shook. "We can talk." He walked in before she could respond. Emily closed the door behind him, looking nervous. Lucas looked around. The room was tidy, but there was a folder identical to the one he found at home on the table. "What's going on, Emily?" "Lucas, I can explain." "Then explain." He knocked on the table, making her startle. Emily hesitated, but, faced with his determined look, she gave in. I was in trouble." "Trouble? What kind of troubles justify this?" She took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "Daniel was embezzling money from the company. I found out months ago. He involved me in this. He said that if I didn't help, I would lose my job and my reputation would be destroyed." Lucas was silent for a moment, trying to process. "And you helped?" "I had no choice." She screamed. "I tried to get out of it, but he threatened me. He said he was going to tell them that I had already signed documents committing myself. I was scared, Lucas. Fear of losing everything." "So you decided to sleep with him?" Emily shivered, but held her gaze. "It wasn't like that." Lucas laughed, a cold sound. "Wasn't it like that? I saw you. I saw it with my own eyes. I did it because I thought I could keep him under control." She finally broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to lose you, Lucas. I just wanted to get out of this without destroying everything we built." Lucas felt the floor disappear. He wanted to scream, he wanted to hate her, but part of him could only feel pain. "You could have told me. I didn't know how." Silence fell between them. Emily fell onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. "And now?" Lucas asked, voice lower. Now he's pressuring me to continue. He said that if I leave, he will sink me with him." Lucas looked at the papers on the table. The situation was worse than he imagined. But at that moment, he knew he needed to make a decision. "It's over, Emily." She lifted her head, her eyes pleading. "Please do not leave me. There are no more us." He walked away, walking to the door. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. "I hope you can deal with the consequences." Emily burst into tears as soon as the door closed. And Lucas, outside, felt himself sinking into emptiness. But he knew that story was far from over. Something inside him said that this was just the beginning. Lucas left that house feeling exhausted. Each step to the car felt like it weighed tons. He wanted to accelerate, to leave everything behind, but when he started the engine, his hands shook. What he had just heard was still echoing in his mind, pounding loudly. Emily wasn't just unfaithful, she was involved in something much bigger, something that could ruin his life in ways he couldn't even calculate yet. He rested his head on the steering wheel for a few seconds, trying to find a thread of logic in all of this. The betrayal hurt, but the desperation in her voice, the panic on her face, made it clear that there was much more behind that scandal. And he still didn't know what to do with that information. He took out his cell phone and looked at the unread messages. None of them were Emily's. Part of him wanted to delete her number, end everything there, but the other part knew that it wasn't that simple. Something inside him pushed him to go deeper. He needed to understand everything before making a definitive decision. On the way home, Lucas called an old friend, Raphael, who worked as a lawyer. He asked to meet that night. He knew he needed legal advice before the situation spiraled further out of control. Hours later, in the bar where they agreed to meet, Lucas told everything. Every detail. Raphael listened in silence, making quick notes on the napkin in front of him. This is serious, Lucas. Corporate fraud is a serious crime. If she signed any document, even under pressure, she is already compromised. And if Daniel is exposed, he will drag her along to save his own skin. Lucas squeezed the glass in his hands. I know that. And that's why I'm here. What can I do? First, maintain emotional distance. You need to look at this as a legal battle, not a personal one. Second, gather evidence. Those papers you found, they are enough to get you started, but you need more. And third, Raphael paused, looking directly at Lucas. You need to decide whether you want to protect it or destroy it. The last sentence echoed in Lucas's mind. He remained silent, feeling the weight of that decision. No matter how much anger consumed him, he still cared about Emily. And he hated it. Returning home, he found the apartment empty. The table was still set with the dinner he had prepared the night before. The melted candles, the untouched dishes. That image seemed to symbolize exactly what had happened to their marriage. Something beautiful, carefully planned, now reduced to ashes. The sound of the lock turning brought him out of his thoughts. Emily entered, hesitantly, her eyes red. I thought you wouldn't be here. We need to talk. Lucas kept his tone firm. Lucas, please. I know I messed up. But I can fix it. I just need time. Time. You took the time to tell me the truth. You had time to ask for help. But instead, he chose to hide everything and even stabbed me in the back. I was scared. Fear of losing you. Fear of being destroyed. And now? Lucas approached. What are you going to do now? Because I'm not going to be dragged into this. I want to know what your plans are. Because honestly, I don't know if you understand how big of a hole you've dug yourself into. Emily swallowed. I have proof. Copies of documents that could incriminate Daniel without dragging me along. But I need a lawyer. Someone who can present this in a way that makes me a victim. Lucas laughed, a bitter laugh. Victim? You are not a victim, Emily. You made choices. He chose to lie, he chose to betray. I didn't betray you out of love. She screamed, her voice breaking. I was desperate. He knew too much. Threatened me. I did this to protect everything we have built. Lucas took a step back, looking at her as if she were a stranger. Do you really think you can justify what you did? That sleeping with him will erase the documents you signed? Or will you erase what I saw? Emily fell onto the couch, covering her face. She looked smaller, fragile. But Lucas no longer knew if it was true or just another manipulation. I need you. Her voice came out almost like a whisper. No, Emily. You need a lawyer. Silence fell heavily between them. Lucas felt the weight of that decision tighten his chest, but he knew he couldn't give in. No more. In the following days, everything seemed to go in slow motion. Lucas handed the documents to Raphael, who began working on the case. Emily left the apartment and stayed in a hotel, sending sporadic messages asking for forgiveness. But Lucas didn't respond. Until, one night, he received an unexpected call. It was Raphael. "Lucas, you need to come here now." The urgent tone made Lucas' heart race. He arrived at the office within minutes, finding Raphael with a serious look. "There's something you need to see." Raphael opened an envelope and delivered a report. Lucas quickly flipped through it, but stopped when he saw his name listed on a financial transaction. "What is that?" "Daniel used your name to cover one of the transfers. You are directly involved, Lucas. And I think Emily knew." Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "That's exactly what you heard. If this goes public, you will be investigated along with her. We need to act quickly to unmask Daniel before he has time to use it against you." Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rush through his body. Now it wasn't just about Emily or the betrayal. He was at risk, and needed to fight to clear his name. He left the office determined. No matter what happened, he would not be the victim in this story. But, when he looked at his phone and saw another message from Emily asking to talk, he felt that the worst was yet to come. Lucas left the office feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The report he held in his hands seemed to burn his fingers, as if every word printed on those pages could destroy everything he knew. He drove aimlessly for some time, the street lights flashing by in blurred flashes. My mind was spinning endlessly, trying to put together the loose pieces of that dark puzzle. Did Emily know? Had she allowed her name to be used, or was it just another move by Daniel to cover his own tracks? The car stopped in front of the apartment, but Lucas remained in the seat for a few minutes, staring at the door as if he expected it to open on its own and bring answers. When he finally entered, the house was silent. The untouched dinner was still on the table, but now the flowers had withered, and the burnt candles left only trails of hardened wax. He walked straight past it, as if the scenario didn't exist, going to the bedroom where he closed the door and sank onto the mattress. The head throbbed. Anger mixed with pain, and both competed for space inside him. As much as he wanted to cut all ties with Emily, he knew he couldn't. Not while his name was linked to that fraud. Not while the danger of being dragged to the bottom with her was real. He picked up the phone and dialed the number he had already memorized. When Emily answered, her voice was weak, as if she had been crying. "Lucas, don't call me that." He cut. "I need you to meet me tomorrow. In Raphael's office." "Why? What happened?" "You know very well what happened." His voice came out louder than he intended, echoing throughout the room. "Your dear boss put my name on the damn paperwork. Now I'm involved in this, Emily. Do you understand what this means?" He heard the muffled sound of sobbing on the other end of the line, but ignored it. "Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. And don't be late." He hung up before she could respond. He felt empty. He wanted that conversation to relieve him, but it only increased the knot in his stomach. The next morning, Emily arrived punctually. She was visibly haggard, with deep circles under her eyes and a pale face. When she entered the room, Raphael formally greeted her and indicated that she should sit down. Lucas remained standing, arms crossed, watching her every move as if hoping to find some hidden clue. "Emily," Raphael began, organizing the papers on the table, "we need you to explain exactly what happened. All. Without hiding anything." She took a deep breath before starting. His voice was shaky but firm. She told how Daniel had approached her under the pretext of professional mentoring, how conversations began to stray into personal confidences. She admitted that, at first, she felt valued and protected, but she soon realized that she was being manipulated. "The first time I signed a document, he said it was just to formalize the project. I didn't know what was really behind it. When I realized, I was already committed." Lucas interrupted her. "And my name? How did he use my name?" Emily lowered her head. He asked for personal information to help me open a joint investment account. I gave the data. I never imagined he would use it against you. You never imagined. Lucas slammed his hand on the table. You handed him everything on a platter. Raphael intervened, asking for calm. Emily continued explaining how Daniel manipulated her emotionally, threatening to expose her if she tried to get out of the scheme. I tried to stop, Lucas. I tried to leave. But he always found a way to trap me. And when you started to get suspicious, I panicked. I didn't know how to tell you. Lucas took a deep breath. And that's why you slept with him? Emily closed her eyes, fighting back the tears. I thought I could buy time. He was obsessed, and I thought if I kept him under control, I could find a way out. Raphael interrupted. Regardless of the justifications, we need to act quickly. The next step is to gather evidence against Daniel and turn it over before he can turn the tables on you both. While Raphael explained the legal procedures, Lucas barely listened. His eyes were fixed on Emily, trying to see beyond the words. She looked sorry, but he didn't know if he could trust her again. When they left the office, Emily tried to follow him to his car. Lucas, please. I know I messed up, but I need you now. He stopped, but didn't turn around. You've already lost me, Emily. Now, I'm just trying to save what's left of my life. She stood there, watching him get into the car and drive away. Over the next few days, Lucas and Raphael worked together to gather evidence. Emily also collaborated, providing messages and emails exchanged with Daniel. Each new piece of evidence added more weight to the case, but it also made everything more difficult for Lucas. He couldn't help but remember the relationship with Emily, the good times, the plans for the future. Everything now seemed distant, as if it belonged to another life. Meanwhile, Daniel began to realize that he was being cornered. He tried to contact Emily several times, but she ignored all the messages. Raphael recommended that she temporarily move to a safe location for fear of retaliation. Lucas, on the other hand, felt increasingly torn. The anger at his betrayal and her involvement in the scheme still burned, but there was also a sense of responsibility. As much as he wanted to cut her off for good, he knew that without her, the case could fall apart. When they finally got to the point of handing over the evidence to the authorities, Lucas and Emily met for the last time in Raphael's office. She was nervous, fidgeting with her hands, while he kept his gaze fixed on the folder on the table. After this, there's no going back, Raphael said, looking at both of them. Emily turned to Lucas. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I never wanted to hurt you. Lucas held her gaze for a moment, but then looked away. It doesn't matter anymore what you wanted or didn't want. Now all that matters is what happens after that. The delivery was made on the same day, but Lucas knew that the real confrontation was yet to come. And he was ready to face it, even though he didn't know if he would come out the other side in one piece. The courtroom was packed. Murmurs echoed off the walls as lawyers organized papers and curious glances turned to the table where Emily sat. She kept her head down, her hands clasped, but her eyes revealed the weight of everything that had happened. Lucas stood on the other side of the courtroom, silent, his gaze fixed on the documents before him. It was the first time in weeks that the two were so close, but the distance between them was irreparable. Daniel entered the room shortly afterwards, accompanied by his lawyer. He wore an impeccable suit and maintained his usual arrogant posture, but Lucas noticed the dark circles under his eyes and the signs of tension on his face. That was no longer the confident expression of the man who controlled everything around him. He knew the siege had closed. When the judge entered, the court fell silent. The prosecutor presented carefully collected evidence, emails, bank transactions, statements. Everything was there, detailed. Emily was called to testify. Her voice shook at first, but she soon found firmness as she described how she had been manipulated and threatened. She admitted her mistakes, but also exposed the blackmail strategies Daniel had used to keep her trapped in the scheme. Across the room, Daniel clenched his fists. With each word spoken, the image he had carefully constructed crumbled. When it was his turn to testify, he tried to reverse the game, blaming Emily for everything, saying that she had seduced and convinced him to participate in the fraud. But the coldness in his tone only reinforced the manipulative character described by Emily. Lucas watched everything with a mixture of anger and relief. Seeing Daniel shrink from the evidence and lose control was satisfying, but the fact that Emily was there, sitting as a defendant and a witness at the same time, made the pain come back in waves. As much as he wanted to free himself from that chapter, he still felt the weight of the past. After hours of hearings and testimony, the verdict was announced. Daniel was found guilty of financial fraud, forgery of documents and extortion. He received a severe sentence, which would keep him away from public and corporate life for many years. Emily, although also found guilty of complicity, received a reduced sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and the presentation of evidence against Daniel. He would perform community service and be on probation for 3 years. Lucas heard the decision with mixed feelings. He knew that Emily would pay for her mistakes, but he couldn't shake the bitter feeling that it wasn't enough to erase what had happened between them. As she left the courtroom, Emily tried to get closer. "Lucas," she started, but he raised his hand, interrupting her. "You made your choices, Emily. And now you'll have to live with them. Just as I am learning to live with mine." She nodded, tears threatening to fall, but she walked away without insisting. In the following months, Lucas dedicated himself to rebuilding his life. He sold the apartment and moved to a smaller place. He focused on work and started going out more, meeting friends he had left aside during his marriage. But most of all, he decided he needed to move on emotionally. It was while walking in a park that he met Sophia. She was sitting on a bench, reading a book, and her easy smile awakened something Lucas thought he'd missed. The fear of opening up again was still present, but Sophia had a lightness that made him slowly lower his guard. Meanwhile, Emily tried to get back on her feet. She did her community service hours at a support center for women victims of emotional and psychological abuse. Although it was difficult to face social judgment, she began to find purpose in helping other women recognize signs of manipulation and avoid traps like the one that had destroyed her life. Emily and Lucas met one last time months later when they signed the final divorce papers. It was a brief meeting, without rancor, but also without room for reconciliation. They exchanged few words and went their separate ways. Daniel, in turn, faced a much less dignified end. In prison, he lost all the privileges he had accumulated over the years. His attempts to manipulate other inmates and authorities were quickly thwarted, and he came to be seen as just another common criminal. Over time, it became irrelevant, exactly what I feared most. Lucas continued advancing, one step at a time. His relationship with Sophia grew naturally, without rushing. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could trust someone again. Although the scars of the past were still there, they no longer defined him. In the end, everyone paid a price for the choices they made. Emily found redemption through repentance and the work of rebuilding. Daniel faced the inevitable downfall of those who build their lives on lies and manipulation. And Lucas, despite the pain, discovered that it was possible to start over. Each decision had its consequences, and none of them were easy. But in the end, everyone was forced to face their truths and deal with the results. If you made it this far, leave your comment telling us what you thought of this story. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. And remember, this channel does not support, in any way, any type of betrayal. Betrayal destroys bonds, trust and lives. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.